Hi, it's me Jacqueline. Welcome to my channel. If you're new to the channel, then please subscribe my channel and visit my Patreon page, link in the description.
At the beginning of April, I was called to Mr. Graham's office after the first broadcast of the day had been completed. "Hi, Ashley, come in and have a seat." "Hi, Mr. Graham." I sat down on the sofa across from his desk and crossed my legs. The skirt I was wearing wasn't a mini, but it was short. "You're doing a wonderful job. The audience, and perhaps even more importantly our advertisers, love you." I smiled. "I'm glad. I love the job and being back here at the station." He was silent for a couple of seconds as he looked at my legs, and I was beginning to feel a little uncomfortable. He finally said, "Mr. Hathers would like you to come to his home Saturday for a meeting." "Mr. Hathers wants to see me?" "Yes, at his home on Saturday at 10 a.m. "Do you know what he wants?" "Is it about the house loan?" "We have a buyer for our old house and the sales contract has been signed, but we're waiting for the purchaser's bank to complete their work. We should have the closing before July. He wants to discuss your career with KBXFTV. "I'm sure that nothing about the house loan will come up." "Oh, okay. Do you remember where he lives?" "I do, if he still lives where we catered the reception for his daughter's wedding." "That's the place." "Okay. 10 a.m.? "Yes. I'll be there." "Is there anything else, Mr. Graham?" "That's all, Ashley, except don't go grungy. You know that Hathers is big on appearance." "I know. He made me quit my cousin's catering service because it didn't think it proper that people saw me serving food." "Exactly. Thanks for coming up." I was obviously being dismissed, so I stood up and left. I wondered what Mr. Hathers wanted to see me about, if not the house loan. As far as my career went, I was already one of the highest paid employees at the station, outside of management, being one of 4 full-time anchors. There was no place further for me to go, so my career there was at its peak. On Saturday, Mom drove me to Mr. Hathers' house. She came in, but the butler asked her to have a seat in the living room while I was escorted to an imposing library where Mr. Hathers and Mr. Graham were waiting. The walls of the room were lined with books from floor to ceiling, and the lavishly furnished room sported a desk large enough to park a car on its surface. I smiled as I entered. "Good morning, Ashley," Mr. Graham said. "You know Mr. Hathers, I believe." "Good morning, gentlemen." "Yes, Mr. Hathers and I met this past summer." "Won't you sit down, Miss James?" Mr. Hathers said, gesturing towards a chair. I sat down and crossed my legs. I had worn a fantastic new dress from the boutique wardrobe, the wardrobe for the broadcasts, and had spent a lot of time grooming my hair and preparing my makeup to perfection. I had used every trick I knew to make me appear older, concentrating on the makeup around my eyes. Mr. Hathers stared at me while I settled in, then said, "Graham, read the letter." "Ashley, we received a letter earlier this week. I'm going to read it to you now." He opened a piece of paper he was holding and began. "Dear Mr. Graham, a situation, of which you should be aware, exists at your television station. The person that you know as Ashley Michelle James is in reality James Michael Ashley, a male, born in Massachusetts. Mr. Ashley has legally changed his name, but is still, nevertheless, a male by all the legal definitions of the word. If this were to be learned by your viewers, it could have serious repercussions, and I felt that you were entitled to know, since I'm sure that Mr. Ashley hasn't disclosed this information to you or the rest of the station's management. He tried to keep this information secret while in Massachusetts, and even spread disinformation about really being just a girl with a weird name. I hope that I have alerted you in time to prevent a catastrophe. Sincerely yours, Mrs. Samantha D. Korvar, Principal, Sleepy Hollow High School." Mr. Graham folded the paper and looked at me. Mr. Hathers hadn't taken his eyes off me for a second. "Mrs. Korvar is one of the reasons that I wanted to leave my hometown," I said. "It's a pity that Massachusetts no longer burns witches. Mrs. Korvar would make excellent kindling." As a former resident of Massachusetts, I was well aware that witches had never been burned in the U.S., but it was a common misconception and used often as an expression. The truth was that convicted witches, both male and female, were hanged or pressed to death in Massachusetts, and even that practice had been abandoned several hundred years ago. At that moment, I could almost have wished for a return to those days, if only for a few hours. I should have been scared and nervous about my secret being revealed like this, but at this moment in time, I was only angry. Ashley, Mr. Graham said, I'm sure that you understand an allegation such as this has to be investigated. As news people, we must always be suspicious of malicious gossips and whistleblowers until we're sure of their facts and their motives. For several months, you've avoided taking the physical examination required of all employees. Is there any substance to this charge? I understand, Mr. Graham, I said. Dan Rather and CBS learned just how important it was to verify information and sources before releasing it. Mrs. Korvar was my high school principal and as such was privy to certain medical information. Have you ever heard of the medical condition known as congenital adrenal hyperplasia? It's often referred to simply as CH. Mr. Hathers shook his head slightly, but Mr. Graham nodded. My cousin, a nurse, could explain this better than I can, I said, perhaps a bit forlornly. What is the CH? Mr. Hathers asked. CH is a condition where female infants are occasionally categorized as males at birth. The infant's clitoris is so enlarged that it appears to be a penis. In cases where the labia are fused, there is no sign of a vagina, and even doctors have been fooled into thinking that a newborn is a male. Some females have been diagnosed as hermaphrodites until the condition is properly diagnosed. The problem comes from a defect in the adrenal glands that results in a flood of hormonal steroids that produce male characteristics in the infant. Newborn males with CH display characteristics during their first few years that are normally not seen until puberty. Fortunately, many states test for that condition at birth now. Are you saying that you were misidentified at birth because of the CH? Mr. Hathers asked. No, my problem is almost the exact opposite. I only use CH as a reference for what can result from a hormonal imbalance. Instead of a condition that causes an increase in the production of hormonal steroids, my condition caused a suppression of androgen, the hormone responsible for shaping the male body. Since both sexes produce male and female's hormones, with the body programmed to produce an overwhelming amount of the specific hormones that define the body when puberty starts, you can understand what happens in a male when androgens are suppressed. You get a person who straddles the line between male and female. Further, the female hormones that are being produced, unabated, throughout the early life of the child, have a significant effect on the brain. Recent studies have indicated that the brain establishes its sex from the flow of hormones in the human system during the first couple of years. Even when the body makes up for lost time later and develops the body as originally intended, the brain has already been imprinted with the individual's sex from the early flow of hormones. So you're saying that your body, through a birth defect, suppressed the hormones that properly define the body at puberty? Mr. Graham asked. Exactly. Although my gender was determined to be male at birth, based solely on the external appearance of genitalia, you can see from looking at me that I never developed any male characteristics. Further, because my body did produce female hormones, as every male body does, these hormones directed the way that my mind developed and my body has matured. Throughout my childhood, I tried to live as a male, but I never fit in. When the other males started to develop male characteristics at puberty, I became even more disassociated from them. They knew I was physically different and shunned me. I buried myself in schoolwork and video games to distract myself from the pain of peer ostracism. It was only after I was properly diagnosed that I began to feel I had a place in this world. The two men looked at me dispassionately. Finally, Mr. Hathers asked, You, still have your male genitals? An extremely undeveloped form of male genitalia, of limited functionality. And you intend to remove it? He asked. As soon as I can. I'll have the money now, thanks to my salary from the station. So you would be a transsexual? Mr. Graham asked. Yes. Even though the change is necessitated by a birth defect, I would have to be described that way. Children with CH, XY Turners, or other such genital birth defects can have their birth certificates legally amended to show their corrected sex, but I don't qualify because my sex chromosomes are still XY. XY Turners? Mr. Graham asked. It's a condition where females are born with male genitals and for all purposes look exactly like a male. Their sex chromosomes are established as XYXO because they only have one chromosome in some cells. They are typically very short, with a mean height of only 4 feet 7 inches. It could be extremely detrimental to the station if our viewers were to learn that we had a transsexual on the staff, regardless of how attractive she is, Mr. Hather said to Mr. Graham. But the law prohibits discrimination based on sex, Mr. Graham said. We wouldn't be discriminating based on sex. We'd be protecting the station from the wrath of viewers with preconceived ideas of sexuality. But Ashley's condition is the result of a birth defect. She's entitled to have a normal life, and if surgery is the only solution, who are we to stand in her way? We're not trying to stand in her way. We're only ensuring that her pursuit of a normal life doesn't drive the station out of business. I listened closely as they discussed my future as if I wasn't in the room, but at least they were using female pronouns. I decided to just listen for now. Ashley isn't a transsexual who simply wanted to alter her appearance from that of a male to that of a female. It's a necessity, Mr. Graham said. Her only defining male characteristic is something that no one has seen, except her doctors. How does that make her any different from other transsexuals? From what I've read this week, most looked like males before beginning their transitions, including having relations with female partners. And most didn't begin their transition until they were well into their adult years. That's the way it's been because of the societal stigma associated with the change, Mr. Hather said, but things are changing, according to everything I've read since you got that letter. Transsexuals are beginning their changes at earlier ages, no doubt due to the dissemination of information available on the internet. Mr. Graham nodded. It makes sense. The earlier they start, the better their changing bodies will conform to their new sex. Which is why Ashley looks so good. She's been changing since she was born. And that hardly makes her a typical transsexual, Mr. Graham said. Her body developed as a female naturally, despite the male genitalia, rather than it being the result of a conscious decision on her part. In fact, I don't think we can refer to her as a transsexual. Rather, she's a... I could see that Mr. Graham was groping for a word, but I continued to keep silent. They would have to arrive at their conclusions on their own. Their intermediate conclusions were directing their thought processes along a path advantageous to my position, better than I could. A woman requiring minor cosmetic surgery to correct a birth defect? Mr. Hather's offered. Perfect, Mr. Graham said. She's a woman requiring minor cosmetic surgery to correct a genital anomaly arising from a birth defect. Okay, Mr. Hather said, looking very relieved. I'm glad we were able to clear this up. Ashley, if anybody questions you about this subject and you feel compelled to answer, you're only having minor cosmetic surgery to correct a genital anomaly that had you misidentified as a male at birth. If anyone really presses the issue, explain about CH. Don't actually tell them you have that condition. Just lead them along and let them draw their own conclusions. But I still have the problem of the insurance examination, the records at school, and motor vehicles that will identify me as a male. I'll take care of the insurance examination, Mr. Graham said. I can promise that the information about your condition will never appear in any of the official reports, as long as you're in good health. And I'll take care of the school records, Mr. Hather said. The file will only show your legal name, and your sex will be listed as female. I don't know about the motor vehicle situation, but if you can get a doctor to certify that your condition is due to a birth defect, I'm pretty sure that I can have the records reflect that you're a female. We might even have your birth certificate amended, just as it would be with a child with XY Turners that was misidentified at birth. I smiled. Thank you. Thank you both very much. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You just keep doing what you've been doing to keep the station's ratings at #1 in our market, Mr. Hather said, smiling. It's nice having important and powerful friends. I repeated the entire discussion to Mom on the way home. And they're really going to do all that for you? She asked. They said they would, and I have no reason to doubt it. I know they want me to remain at the station. They've already done plenty to get me here, and now they're going to use their influence to make sure I'm not forced to leave in embarrassment because someone disclosed my secret. That's wonderful, dear. Now, if only your Uncle Bob would come around. Perhaps in time. The situation is still new to him, and he may just need time to adjust. When we arrived home, I went to my bedroom to change out of the dress. I put on a shirt after hanging the dress in my closet and lay down on my bed. Staring up at the ceiling, I thought about the changes that had occurred during the past year and the outlook for a better life ahead. I wasn't so naive as to believe there wouldn't still be many problems and challenges ahead, but I had a great deal to be thankful for. I should even be grateful to Mrs. Corvar. By writing that letter, in an obvious attempt to do me harm for her own homophobic reasons, she had helped me greatly. But I had no intention of ever thanking her.
Please subscribe for the next part and visit my Patreon page for early access.